Adi, I have a squeaky chair and a brand new high-powered podcast mic, which is not a good combo.
Are we should we make it so that like every few seconds you just move back and forth in the chair and it'll be part of the feature of this episode?
Oh man. On this episode, we're going to talk about addiction, talking to my friend Adi. And by the way, if I had a PhD, I would make people call me Dr. John Kim. You don't, you
All the
don't,
time.
re- you don't request that of friends.
I don't, you know what I think did it for me?
Hmm.
That's funny. I've never talked about this on an episode ever. Um, Number one, my dad was always Dr. Jaffe in Hebrew, but like Dr. Jaffe.
Hmm.
Um, and he went by his first name with most people. But I had a professor in grad school, and she did that. Like you couldn't call her. I don't remember what her name was, but let's say it was Beth, right?
She
It's
would correct you
graduate
and
school,
say,
so you,
right.
yeah, she'd be like doctor and her last name every time. And I think it just kind of it left this bad taste in my mouth. So I
I
don't
mean,
do
I
it.
like it. It's humble. Koreans and Jewish people, we have a lot in common, and some of it is this like high achieving grades, straight A, study your ass off. I got a lot of that growing up.
Yeah, that's like the expectation, right? One of my first jobs, was I in graduate school? No, this was before graduate school. I was always good at math, and one of my first jobs after all my insanity that Wimby will get to at some point on this podcast was at a place called Polymath, and it was a Korean
Hmm.
run after school program. And that was the first time I learned that for a lot of Korean kids, they go to school during the day, then they go home to eat, and then they go to school during the evening too. It's like a
Yeah.
whole second school
Can you imagine? And then not really have a life at all. It was just all about
at
getting
all.
great grades, which I don't know if today grades hold the same weight anymore. It definitely doesn't guarantee you shit.
No, no, that's true.
Yeah.
I think people are losing. They're not as enamored with the idea of getting a diploma, right?
Yeah. Before we get into addiction and your brand new book, let's play a quick game of uh, Marry, Fuck, or Kill. It's Marry, Fuck, or Kill. And I'm going to give you three cities: Los Angeles, New York, or Costa Rica. Marry, Fuck, or Kill.
Ooh. Um, I'm trying to see if I'm gonna go for the realistic or the fantasy. Um, I will probably marry LA, fuck Costa Rica, and kill New York.
Oh, yeah. So that would have been my answer pre fires. Post fires. Post fires, man. I think it might be, and I don't know yet, right? Because I'm still in it, but I think it would be
Sure, sure.
um, Kill L. God, I can't even say it. I feel so bad saying it. Kill LA. um, Marry maybe New York.
Mm.
Going from Tupac to Biggie. I never thought I would say this, and then fuck Costa Rica, as in that may be an adventure
Yeah,
in our life soon. So we'll see. I don't know.
yeah. Well, we can meet in Costa Rica
Yeah, yeah,
because we both want to fuck Costa Rica. So, and this is a good fuck Costa Rica, by the way. Just to be clear,
yeah, yeah,
this is
yeah.
like if I could cheat on my wife, which is LA in this context, I would cheat on her with Costa Rica.
And maybe it's not even a cheating thing, right? Like just because we
Oh,
said fuck Costa
I
Rica
like it.
doesn't. Maybe it's with consent. Maybe it's
Could be.
with consent, and it's the third person in the threesome, right? So I don't know.
This conversation could go a multitude of ways. I love it.
Adi Jaffe has an amazing story. He was on my podcast before. He went from, oh man, drug dealer in his 20s to um, healing, to husband, to father, to entrepreneur, and now published author. Well, you were published before, but now second book,
Like a real published author. Now it's
like a
also with
real,
a publisher and everything.
yeah,
Like you.
yeah. That's subjective, but tell us about your book, and then let's dive into addiction. It's a huge, huge topic.
Yeah, yeah. So my second book is called Unhooked: Free Yourself from Addiction Forever. And the idea behind the book came to me as it it sort of fell out of my first book called The Abstinence Myth, but I look at addiction as a symptom, an end result of internal suffering or
Mhm.
habitual learning from early on. I don't look at the addiction as the problem. I look at it as a symptom. And so I just wanted to write a book about that. And the title really came out of the fact that a lot of clients who come to me, they say I'm hooked on cocaine, or
Mhm.
they'll probably say I'm hooked on blow, is how they'll say it, or I'm hooked on porn, or I'm hooked on this
Right.
TV show. And I tell them, well, look, that's not the thing you're hooked on. That is what you use to circumvent the pain or
Mhm.
the suffering from some other hooks. And I'm literally imagining like viscerally like hooks, right? They have
Right.
them in you. And so they cause pain, they cause discomfort. When somebody gets really hooked, they get uncomfortable. And we
Mhm.
use those other behaviors to overcome the discomfort.
How do we know if we are hooked? Right. So whether it is you just mentioned blow, porn, I guess that doesn't matter
Sure.
what the vice is, but how do we know that it is actually a problem, an addiction?
Yeah. The reason this is a really good question is a lot of people say, is just the fact that I do it a lot. Is that a
Mhm.
problem? And then my wife would be addicted to water and maybe even yoga.
Right.
But it's not. It's just because you do something a lot, and I mean that could be daily through half your
Hmm.
day. That by itself does not create an addiction, or that doesn't necessarily mean that we're dealing with hooks. The way you have to look at it is it a behavior you repeat? When you do it, are there often times when you either are trying actively not to engage in it or you engage in it more than you want to? And then have you tried to change that? Have you tried to use it less or less frequently and that's failed? And then the big final one is it causing you problems in your life?
Right.
So that's a much broader definition. Most people when they think about addiction, they think about alcohol and drugs.
Hmm.
But I would argue many people are, I mean, this is not an argument at this point. Many people are addicted to this phone, right?
Yeah. Me.
It's the same thing. It's like they go to look at something, and next thing you know, it's an hour and a half later. They
Hmm.
told themselves they weren't going to do it. They've been scrolling on Instagram or reading the latest tirades on Twitter from somebody. An hour and a half has passed. They meant to spend time with their partner, but they didn't. And or they've been sitting at the dinner table, and it's been 40 minutes later, and it's passed, and everybody's gone. Like that sort of vortex is not all that different than what people say around brownouts from alcohol. It's like I
Hmm.
wanted to just have a drink or two to chill, but now I'm 10 drinks deep and the night's done and I feel kind of crappy and it's time to go to bed.
Yeah. So I'm addicted to my phone just because of the pull that it has on me. I'm, on it like pretty much since I wake up, and then I hide behind that addiction by justifying it because I use it for work. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Now, does
I
it does
do.
it does it impact my life? I don't know. That's where it gets kind of gray because I am kind of powerless over it at the same
Mm.
time. I don't think my cell phone use really directly impacts my life or my relationships.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think phones are such a good place to start with this because let me just walk you through this. How many people have that are listening to this or watching this right now have been to a restaurant
Hmm.
and you looked over at the table next to you, and you've got anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6 people, and nobody's talking to one another. They're
Right.
all doing this,
Yep. They're on their phones.
and it could be a family,
Hmm.
and you see the mom and dad sitting there on their phones, and the kids are all on their phones. And what's the feeling that first comes over you when you see something like that?
I mean, just sadness because the
S-
disconnect with the human connection.
100%. You feel
Yeah.
sadness. Now, here's something that I want to stress for everybody. This is the most troubling part about this concept of getting hooked. You don't know that it's happening while it's happening because
Hmm.
you're hiding from it. That's literally the point of the behavior is to escape. So my notion is looking at that family, not especially for you and I or people that are kind of like in this clinical world, part of the reason we feel so sad is we know it's an indicator of the lack of connection in that family.
Mm.
There's nobody in one of those circles that is aware enough to say, wait, we all took the time to come out to dinner. We're all sitting around the table together. They probably don't get that all the time. Phones away, let's connect. Right?
Right.
They're not resourced enough to do that. And that's I think why we feel the sadness. So the reality, I mean, I work on my phone to a lesser extent than you, let's say, and then Sophie, works on her phone all the time.
Yeah.
This is a thing that happens to all of us. We look at our phone and we think 3 minutes have passed, but it's been like 25. And
Oh,
that time compression thing
yeah.
is a problem.
Hey, that's isn't that what porn's like? I mean, college, when there was a lot of heavy porn use or with my friends and I, you would start looking at images an hour or two, suddenly 4 hours in, and then you feel like you're unproductive and what am I doing? And you have this kind of gross feeling. But yeah, it's interesting. I've never heard addiction kind of explored through that door where you lose track of time, like almost like you're so submerged in it, you're hitting a flow state in a way.
Yeah. So that I've never really thought about connecting that to a flow state, but think about like I think you can almost talk about addiction as the negative inverse of a flow state, right?
Mm,
Somebody got so uncomfortable, they needed to leave that place of discomfort, but they
mm,
needed to leave it in a way that doesn't make them conscious of the fact that they are doing something outside of themselves to leave an internal state. Because if you were aware of it, you would probably need to do something about it.
right, right. Some of the more difficult addictions to diagnose and work through is like when you said cocaine or blow, that's kind of obvious, or if you're injecting a needle in your arm. But things like love addiction, things like sex addiction, that kind of stuff, it's blurry because how would you actually define something like love addiction or sex addiction when love and sex is something that we engage in like food and water?
Yeah, and so the point of my first book, The Abstinence Myth, talked about how we are wrong to judge recovery from addictive problems by abstinence. And I actually use behavioral addictions as one of the clearest indicators of that, right? When
Mm,
somebody has a love addiction, we're not saying you should stop experiencing love in your life. That can't be the appropriate recovery state. Like,
right,
hey, look, you're addicted to love, so what we're going to do is we're going to get you to a place where you'll never experience love again. How does that
right,
sound as a therapeutic approach? Everybody
right.
would run for the hills. So now you get into nuance, and the nuance is, well, what is your addictive compulsive version of love and what is it not?
Mm,
But John, you and I have talked about this enough. Merely asking that question gets to a much deeper issue with the person, and that is intimacy, boundaries,
mhm,
communication, right? That's what's really there. And I'll use a line that I said literally myself while I was at a SAA meeting, which was Sex Addicts Anonymous meeting, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, because
mhm,
I used to watch porn every day, multiple times.
yeah,
I didn't even think about it, man. It was just like a regular thing. I
right.
literally didn't realize that every time I was in a fight with my wife and girlfriends before that, but with my wife, I would go to porn because I didn't know how to talk to her, and porn never talked back. So it was like the perfect solution. So I'm
Mm,
sitting in one of those meetings one time, and I looked at the guys around me and I said, guys, I don't need a sex addiction meeting. I need like a Liars Anonymous, not a Sex Anonymous meeting. Where's the Liars Anonymous meeting? And what I
mm,
was saying was, I don't know how to own my truth. I don't know how to communicate honestly. I don't know how to say when I want something, when I don't want something. I just didn't know intimacy. I didn't know how to connect
mm.
intimately with somebody else. And I think at its core, many layers below, a lot of people who struggle with addiction have the same problem.
Oh, this is really interesting. So, kind of like the underlining, maybe a lot of what addiction hangs on is the inability to be intimate, the
And
disconnect
know how to
with,
communicate. Yeah.
yeah, with
Yeah. I
other
mean,
people, but also self.
I hear you and Vanessa all the time when we're hanging out, right? It's like I see in the two of you, and you're both clinicians, so it's probably even elevated, the same sort of stuff that I had to go through with Sophie over the
Hmm.
decades, which is how do I talk to a person who's different than I am, who has different desires, different values, different experiences in life, and how do I bridge that gap? I would say almost always. I was watching this video you shared from. It looked like maybe a talk the two of you did together,
Yeah.
and you might remember this as soon as I say it. You were starting a track on how it's hard for a man to become embodied in an intimate
Hmm.
physical experience. And you were I think where you were trying to go is I get in my head, or I start. And Vanessa then tries to complete your sentence, but she completes it differently than the direction you were going in. And then there was this cool little interaction between the two of you that
Mhm.
was playful, but also a little bit loaded of like, hey, that's not what I want to say. Don't put words in my mouth, right? And
Right,
it's
right, right.
and we're experienced. Like you and I, we have experience in this kind of work. And yet when somebody kind of threads into your emotional security and safety, we get triggered.
Mhm,
So the model that I talk about in the book is Sparrow. It's stimulus,
mhm,
perception, activation, response, outcome. Sparrow. And so stimulus happens. My wife says something. That's the trigger.
mm,
I perceive it a certain way. I go, wait, why is she being a
right.
bitch? I'll just say the word like, why is she being a bitch? I
Mhm,
perceive it a certain way. It feels like an offense.
mhm,
Now I get activated. Now I'm anxious or I'm angry. And so I create a response, that aligns with that. My old version, the response would be very avoidant. I would just very, very avoidant. So no matter what feelings I had inside, I would need to try to figure out how to show up as if I had no feelings and leave
right.
or stand there. My new response really tries to say, okay, how do I this really aggravated me.
Mhm,
How do I now communicate that to my wife? How do I and that came literally in the last decade or so of my life because if it doesn't, over time I get so activated, I get so emotionally triggered over and over and over that eventually I need to escape, and that's where my addiction happened.
mhm. I love this concept, the sparrow, in your book. You walking us through the actual process, and
Yeah,
it seems like the road forks at um, the R, which is with the reaction instead of the
response.
response. Yeah.
Yeah,
So like
yep.
it seems like a response would be prescribed, but the reaction is a lot of times that's the old us, and then the new would be to respond instead of react. So instead of leaving, being avoidant, stonewalling, whatever, or going toward your vices, to sit with, or to express how you feel, or to do all the things that are difficult.
Yeah. Well, you look, first of all, what's that saying? I forget who says it. It might be like Ed Milet or something like that, but like choose your hard, right?
Mm,
Um, being emotionally triggered my whole life and being very pessimistic about my relationship with other people and feeling very alone and isolated when I was younger. And I'm talking like 17, 18 to early 30s, let's say.
hmm
Um, that was hard, man. I felt like I needed to always impress people or say the right thing and show, right? Show with my mask and my
Yeah.
costume the way that I needed to show up. So that was hard because I never really felt authentic. I never felt like myself. And
hmm
my vices were a way to deal with that discomfort. And so that was hard. And it led to jail and led to all the other stuff.
Right.
You're 100% right. It's hard now too. Right? Sophie and I literally just had a fight for like, it was actually one of our longer ones for hours
Mm-hmm.
because she didn't like my tone and
Mm-hmm.
I felt misunderstood. But now we talk about it and I don't feel like I have to hide. So the conversations are hard, but the life I get to live is easier. So it's like I got to live a life where people saw me a certain way before and that worked out, but internally it sucked. Now internally it feels pretty solid most of the time and sometimes I have conflict in my life and it's okay.
Vanessa and I just got into a little fight last night where I felt hurt. And one of the things that's been super helpful for me is when I get hurt, I react, like one of your R's.
Yeah.
And now I'm able to try to understand before trying to be understood. I'm able to take a beat, see the story through their lens, not only through their
Mm,
lens, but who they are. Like the response coming from not just what's on the surface, but tied to one story, and then understanding
mm,
that person better, and then it makes whatever they said, it makes that more understandable, and then it makes it less personal. So then I'm like, oh, they said that because it's coming from here, and she has a story, so it isn't necessarily an attack, but maybe it's her way to react to the situation. It's her reacting, not responding. And then I have and then it
yeah.
leaves enough room for me to be then compassionate, and then me things that would usually hurt me, I'm able to kind of flip it where it dissolves faster. I don't hold resentments and stuff
Mm.
anymore. So within 2 hours, I'm good. I'm like thoroughly good. Where before it would be 2 days. I would hold on to that shit, man. I would fucking walk around pouty and be a complete man child. 2, 3 days a week, I would be mad. So I've gotten the time down from a week to like a couple hours digesting, good understanding. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think through practice, everything becomes easier, right? Like,
yeah,
when you and I did that workout a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, whenever that was, it was really, really hard. But if we did the same workout for 3 months straight, it would be easier because we've done
sure,
it so much, our muscles would adapt. And I think the
right.
same happens in emotional reactivity, right? So many of the practices that I employ, that you employ in our daily lives are really about sitting with discomfort and learning how to manage our own response.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it does start, John, and I mean, you've said that before, right? And I've heard it in other studies too, but I love the seek first to understand, then to be understood, right?
Yeah.
We do, Sophie and I, we were just talking about how we're doing that to each other. Like we both feel pretty tapped out right now, and we just want the other person to acknowledge us, and the other person is looking for the same thing. So you get kind of stuck in an impasse. Um, one of the things you have to be willing to do is be open and talk openly about the experience you're having.
Hmm.
But the other piece is it sounds to me like training that you had to do yourself to not put all of your stake in being able to express yourself, but put at least as much of it in trying to understand the other person.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Training. I like that word because it means that reps are required. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so,
Ooh.
yeah, and I think a lot of people don't see relationships like that, and they think when things get hard, it means that maybe the relationship's not meant to work. But if you really haven't put in reps, you're not going to have a clear idea if the relationship really is going to work, because a relationship without legs is not a fair assessment. And so you got to have
Yeah.
some. They don't have to be solid legs, but they have to be legs. They have to stand on something for you to look at the
Yeah.
relationship and think like, oh, is this sustainable and a good thing, or is it not?
I love that you just use legs. Did you see that research? I think it just came. I was just aware of it the last few weeks, but where leg muscle mass was one of the best predictors physically of, and density, I assume, for like your own body size, was one of the best predictors of longevity and lowered
Oh shit!
mortality.
I had no
Yeah.
idea. So
So
so you mean?
all those squats and deadlifts you're doing are gonna pay
Oh,
off, man.
dude, I'm gonna live till 300.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Wait,
But
what's the
but
correlation? Why is that? Why is leg density, leg muscle? How's that
I
related to
I
longevity?
I don't know, and just to be fair, I think this came to me secondhand, but
Yeah.
I heard it from three different sources secondhand, so I need to track back the research. But um, I'm just going to use it as a nice metaphor for the thing you just talked about, right? Everybody, by the way, everybody probably listening right now, although if they listen to you, they're pretty actionable because you're so much about actionable tips and behaviors and habits. But everybody loves silver bullets. We
Hmm.
love the idea of a magic pill. We love the notion that, oh, if I could just have this one hack, everything will be good for me. And honestly, I laugh at the concept at this point. Like the premise is BS. Like that notion does not exist, right? Limitless, the pill, like all that stuff.
Hmm.
There are costs and benefits. There are pros and cons. There are ups and downs to everything you experience in life. And in relationship, you build the legs, as you talked about, by reps. And how do you build the legs by reps? You lift the heavy stuff. You do a lot
Right.
of walking. You take action, right? Um, and I couldn't agree more. By the way, the same exact thing parlays into the addiction space, right? So many people who come in for addiction work, they
Hmm.
think the tips I'm going to give them is, well, let's drink less on this day, or let's get the alcohol out of your house. Sure, that's a nice starting point. But that's not what will beat your addiction. What will beat your addiction is shifting your daily habits, right?
Hmm.
So I'll go with one that I'm a big fan of, and we've talked about this before. Like I used to call it realistic, but I used to be pretty damn pessimistic
Hmm.
and very scarcity based. Like all day, every day, everything that I could think about was what was going to go wrong, who was going to fuck
Right.
me over,
Yeah.
like what was going to break down. That was my my mentality, that was so stimulus perception, right? Sparrow, stimulus perception. I would take no matter what came at me, I would take it as an indication of something broken, an indication
Mhm.
of lack of trust. And so guess what? I had a ton of proof that people were untrustworthy, that
Right.
the world was going to screw me over. That's I was inundated with that.
Because it's
And
the only thing you saw because it's the only thing you saw. You didn't look at optimism, good, opportunity. You were blind to
no,
that.
not at
You
all.
only saw, and then also that probably set you in a state of fight or flight, which is a lower
Constantly.
frequency. Yeah.
So confirmation bias is the term for that, right? I believed people were untrustworthy. It was dog eat dog, every man for himself. And
Yeah.
so that's what I saw everywhere in the world. The world was reflecting that back to me, even though right next to it was a ton of proof that people are trustworthy and there's a
Hmm.
lot of good in the world, in my
Hmm.
world, even back then, right? So what I work on with a lot of people is how do you shift perception, right? How do you actually
Mm.
shift people to thinking differently about their world? And
Yeah.
that's not what people come to me for. That's what's hard, right? People come because they think you're gonna teach me how to use less. And
Right.
then I say, "No, no, we're gonna work on how to look at your life differently. We're gonna
Mm.
look at how to think about the world differently." So, things like gratitude checklist,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
things like that. You and I, we've done some cold plunges together, right?
Yeah.
Cold plunge, I'm all in for the um, Wim Hof cold plunges improve your r- circadian kind of rhythm, and they improve your you know
Immune
uh
system and yeah.
immune,
So
yes, thank you,
yeah.
immune system, and regulate and all that. That's great.
Hmm.
You know what I love about cold plunges? That
Mm.
they suck.
Because
That's what
they're
I love
hard.
about them.
Yeah.
I love that they suck because if I can in 3 minutes prove to myself that I can do really hard things with just cold water,
Yeah.
then when my wife and I fight, or when my kid's having a bad day and I need to step up, I don't worry about whether I have capacity.
Right. Right. Um, Man, I love what you're saying about people coming to you asking you to help them with their addiction, uh, get them to get sober, and of course, I'm sure you have a lot of techniques with that. But kind of on the macro, saying I'm gonna try to help you see the world different. Right. It reminds me
Yeah.
of like fitness. Someone coming in because they want to lose 10 pounds, and then they leave months later, living a certain way or having a different relationship with food. Like these bigger things, right, that are more sustainable. By the way, I don't know
Yeah.
if it's pouring. Is it pouring where you're at?
Pouring.
Dude, it's
Pouring.
pouring. So if you hear any rain, um, in the background, LA this is like, in LA when it rains, it's like a state of emergency. It's fucking pouring in Los Angeles, which is not why I want to kill it. I think rain is great and amazing and romantic. I wish it would have happened a few months earlier. This rain.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Whew, can you? Oh, I don't even
My
want to
my
think
my
about it.
answers
That's
my answers to the marry, fuck, and kill would be very different if this rain came up just a few months
yeah.
earlier. Yeah,
Mm,
but what you're also talking about, I can relate to because when I used to be a miserable fuck, I would only live in 2 years, and that was dread and worry, and I was always worried about shit, and I just dreaded the future. And it wasn't
yeah.
until after the divorce, I trained myself, and I didn't even know I was doing it, but through
Mm,
things like using my motorcycle as a meditation machine, finding community and fitness, and all these things. I trained myself to kind of see the world that you do, and now it's so much easier. I mean, look, I have no fucking house.
you
I have
literally,
two pair.
seriously,
Yeah, I have two pair of pants, man.
seriously.
And listen, I'm having a conversation with you. We hung out, we hung out doing the men's group and stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm able now, and I think it's because I put some reps in. I'm able to see silver linings. I'm able to trust something greater. I'm able to live on a higher frequency, and it's because
Yeah.
I've put some reps in.
Because well, you put the reps in, you got tested, right? I mean, look, man, this started for me. We talked about this in the last podcast, but like, I had to go to jail for a year.
Right, right,
you know so I
right.
started out, I was in rehab for about a year beforehand, and that was my first experience. I'd been arrested 4 or 5 times before, but it was like 2 nights,
Yeah,
5 hours, three
yeah.
days like most people can manage 3 days in a cell. It still sucks, don't get me wrong, but 3 days in a cell you can probably manage, right? 10 months in a rehab,
Wow.
pretty different,
Yeah.
right? It's like you got to figure out, They're going to put different people in your room on
Hmm.
different days. And some days they're going to like you, and other days they're going to come down hard on you. You still have to stay, because if you don't, the judge is going to know you left rehab, and then you're looking at like 15 years
Right.
in prison. So I had to make that calculation. And John, after all that, I had to go turn myself in, put on my jail clothes because you don't
Hmm.
want to wear fancy stuff to jail. And
Hmm.
my dad was in the court with me. And then I'm fully sober. Like I've already fixed my life, and they're going to take me away to jail for a year. And you
Wow.
walk in and you're like, I'm not going to leave here for a year. And all the stuff you heard, right? The bend over and spread them,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
showers,
yeah.
the drugs being brought in, the gang stuff, the
Wow.
fights, the riots, like it's happening.
Wait, how old
And
were you? How old were you when you were in there for the year?
I was 26 when I went in.
Wow, that is
So
crazy.
you just got to figure out how to live with it. And so when I
Yeah.
came out, like one thing I knew for sure is I'm resilient. If
Hmm.
I can do that, I can do whatever. Now I never want to do
Yeah,
that again in my life, but I
yeah,
can. And so, John, like, as obviously my heart goes out to you and your family, like that's the experience you all just had was horrid. Um, and with a kid, like, how do you even explain what just happened to a
yeah,
child? All that,
yeah.
all that. And what I saw in you, what I saw in Vanessa is it's like this windshield wiper effect, right? It's like
Mm,
all the stuff you thought mattered, it's all gone. Like the windshield wiper
mhm.
went like this, and all of a sudden there's this clarity of purpose and of humanity. And I think that's something in the book I talk about this. Most of us don't have a back against the wall moment.
Right. Where life
Most
forces you, where life forces you into a
Yeah.
corner. Yeah, like your jail time or me losing my house, divorce. Yeah,
And yeah, and so when that happens, that's a real test,
yeah, of course.
and it can't be manufactured. So I now learned to look at it, and I don't know if you would agree with this. You're in the middle of one of these, but I now look at those. They're like chrysalis moments, man. They're like
Hmm.
this is where you become the next version of yourself. And my
Hmm.
experience to date, tomorrow it could be proven wrong, but to date, I've gone through maybe three or four of those. And you know what, man? They're always better. On the other side, whatever my next version of life somehow magically ends up better than I could have expected. And so now it's hard to say I embrace them because they suck when you're going through them,
Yeah.
but I don't run from them.
Also, I'm a big fan of story, and it catapults your story forward. So, this isn't a chapter; it's an act break. And act breaks, they pull
Mm,
the floor out of the protagonist, where you're now going to go on
yeah.
another hero's journey. And so, every time you go through something like this, whether your house is burning down, going through a divorce, going to jail, when the universe positions you in the corner where you are either going to, bounce back or stay down. This catapults your story, because on the other side of this is also you're going to have an amazing story, depending on which road you decide to decide to go down.
Yeah, and yes, and it's the road less traveled, or the unknown world. None of us know what would have happened if we took the other turn. I think the expectation is if things worked out in this branch that we chose, then it was the right choice. But none of us know what would happen on the other one. So it
Sure,
could have been better. It could have been worse. It could have been equally magnificent on the other side. And so
but it
just to
doesn't
take it
matter.
back
It
to the,
does. It doesn't matter, because this is our truth and this is our life.
eh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And so I've stopped living in the what if world,
yeah,
and I now live in this. My life right now is magnificent. It comes with all the challenges, right? But
yeah. Of
it's
course.
magnificent, and I know everything could turn upside down next week.
Yeah, yeah.
And to live in that acceptance has been incredibly freeing for me.
Hey, your next book should just be called one word. It should just be called and.
And
And you're talking
and
about both sides, everything, the nuance.
mm,
What is different about Unhooked than other books about addiction? What was your angle, and what compelled you to write this book when addiction is such a huge topic?
yeah, thank you. I mean, so one thing is really broadening our discussion about addiction. I think too many people focus on drugs and alcohol. I think the porn part is not discussed enough. Or there may be books specifically about porn, and it's like they separate it out. Um, there's a stat. I'm gonna ruin it right now. I should look at my own freaking book. But I think it's something like 30 to 40% of men hide their porn use from their partner.
Mm,
So think to yourself about men who regularly use porn, like daily or near daily, but their partner doesn't know that it's happening. Um, Obviously, it's not really cheating per se, right? They're not with another person, but they have a side habit that
hmm
whether they know it or not, they're using to deal with discomfort, they're using to deal with intimacy issues. And I think what ends up happening in many of these situations is it causes these fractures in the relationship because there's not work being done. Like you said, the reps are not being done to heal the relationships. They're being done to heal the wounding in the
mm.
individual utilizing the porn. So like porn is one big one. But another one that I put in the book
Wait,
that
also real
I
quick,
want,
with
yeah,
porn,
please.
I think the other thing that's damaging is not just are you, numbing and all that, but also um, you start to train your brain uh, to see what sex intimacy should look like. So now you're tracing someone else, a production possibly, instead of creating your co-creating an intimate experience. And then
Mm,
there's pressure,
absolutely.
and then people feel objectified. People are, like all that kind of stuff. So especially younger, a lot of young
Ooh,
kids who have not had a lot of experience, just um, they're just doing what they see or saw in the videos.
which is by the way how I came up. I found porn at
Yeah,
11 or 12 years old. I mean,
yeah, me too,
the
me
the
too.
the imprinting of sex for me was 100% from porn. And the again, it's not a joke, but the thing I used to say all the time to people was, when I would go see superhero movies, I'll move to the other addiction here in a second too, but the thing I used to say was when I would see superhero movies or like scary movies when I was a kid, I knew they were fantasies, right? Like I knew
Hmm.
Superman could fly because of visual effects.
Right.
I didn't know that about porn. So porn
Right.
to
That was
me
real.
was sex. Porn was about sex.
Right.
Superhero movies were about fairy tales. And now I know they're both fairy tales. Like
Hmm.
porn is created in a studio with people who are paid. I mean, now that I'm an adult, like I know all this stuff, like all these things. You know how many men feel inadequate because they can't perform like porn stars, but
Of
like
course. Of course.
they don't know all the lengths to which those men and women go through and, injuries, like literally injuries that people go through in order to make that performance. So there's a lot I know about now that I didn't before. But so porn, extending it to porn was one other one. But one thing that I talk about in the book that I don't think people think about ever in our society is essentially like work or success addiction, right? I think a lot of people have learned to
Mm,
run to what is probably pretty adaptive, right? It's to performance, it's to work.
mhm,
And I talk about one of my clients who called me after what he thought was a heart attack,
mhm,
collapsing on the lobby of the building that he came out of, having one of the biggest successes he's had in his career, and then he
mhm.
gets a heart attack in front of his clients, and it was embarrassing, and he didn't know what was going on. But then it was worse because he went to the hospital. It turned out it wasn't a heart attack at all. He just had a panic attack, and he was like,
Yeah.
why the hell am I getting a panic attack after my biggest win of my life? And it turned out, s- I mean, substantial trauma history, uh, a ton of developmental issues that came up, but he's been running from them towards money and success. And he
Mhm.
made it, right? The people I work with that made it with money and success often have broken marriages,
Right.
destroyed health, non-existent kind of what do I like self-regulation mechanisms, right? And so because every time something sucked, they just went to work and they worked harder than anybody else before and they've been incredibly successful, but it's kind of left this void. So when we were
Yeah.
talking before about how do you define an addiction, they're working till midnight, they're working till 1 o'clock.
Mhm,
They're working instead of going to dinner with their family, right? They
mhm.
say to themselves, no, we're going to go on the vacation. This time I mean it. They go on a ski vacation. Everybody else is skiing. They're in the lodge, working on emails, right? Like that's also an addiction.
Yeah, I love that you bring up success addiction, which I've never heard that term before.
I mean,
But
it's kind of,
especially
we talk about them as workaholics, is how we talk about them,
yeah,
right?
yeah, but also putting so much energy into career that you really have no more energy for anything else, yourself, family, kids. It's like everything, all the chips doubling down in one bucket, and so the life is very lopsided, you know.
100%.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know you've done work with a lot of different people. I've worked with some professional athletes
Hmm.
and some performers, like professional A-list kind of musicians and performers. Have you done any of that work?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that is one of the most glaring examples of that
Hmm.
that I've ever seen, right? And there's this, I mean, it's a really tough balance that that specific population has to strike in order to both maintain their level of success and have some semblance of a normal life. It is incredibly difficult.
Well, just, in this world, to be great, not good, but to be great, and when you talk about, like, for example, an athlete, the time required, the effort required, the lifestyle that's required to be great, not good, to be great,
Yeah.
it's almost impossible to not have a problem. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
almost
and
fun.
but
Yeah.
yes, but the people that have longevity. So I think this is the reason I always like metaphors, but the reason I like athletes as a metaphor for um the the other people that I work with is first of
Hmm.
all, it's easy to measure the success, right? If you're winning, you're successful. If you're not winning, you're not successful. So it's easy to measure it, harder
Yeah.
to measure it in terms of mental health. But the other piece, we all see the performance, right? So we go watch a basketball game, we see people running around for an hour.
Hmm.
We think that's what being a basketball player is about. That's the tip of the iceberg, right?
Hmm.
The amount of workouts, practices, but then also
Right.
self-care and healing, nutrition,
Yeah.
stretching,
Yeah.
psychological coaching that goes on. That's the bottom of the iceberg. And you can tell the difference in longevity. Nobody gets to be a professional athlete for 15 years
Right.
if they don't also do all the other stuff. They can be great for 2 or 3 years and then they
Yeah,
burn out.
it's any sport. Same thing with football. Same thing with MMA. Yeah, you're only you get your 8 seconds. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's how when I'm talking to my clients who come to they may come to me for drinking because they're a high-powered executive
Hmm.
and drinking is part of the culture. That's how they celebrate. That's how they gift each other the best, the best bottles of wine on the planet. Blah, like it's such a part of the culture that next thing you know, I mean, literally, it's not at all unfamiliar for many of the executives that I work with to put down 4 to 6 drinks a night,
Yeah.
like regularly.
Yeah. Yeah.
2 to 3 glasses of wine with dinner, then a
Hmm.
drink after, but the drink is a double. So like here, you just had
Right.
5 drinks.
Right.
Um, regularly, like 5, 6 nights a week. Yes, there's a habitual component to it. What many of them don't realize is their sleep has suffered for decades.
Hmm.
Um, they've let go of their health, and so that those are habits we have to put in. And then, like we talked about before, there's also like all the psychological stuff that goes on with being inebriated, which means you just don't have to deal with your emotions. So
Hmm.
what I love about um you asked about Unhooked being different than other people. First of all, it's a little prescriptive. Like it gives you a real process to work through. And I wrote it like a choose your own adventure book. So the first half, you talked about acts. The first act of the book is really setting the scene for a different way of thinking about addiction. You're not addicted to cocaine. You're addicted to pain relief from
Right.
developmental trauma that you had, right? Um, we'll deal with the trauma, the cocaine will be easier to deal with. So
Hmm.
first I set the scene, but then I set the sparrow eat loop thing where I talk about that process of how to get through it. Um, and then finally is like this laundry list. I want to say we put like 15 hallmark practices in there so that people can have really like tangible, actionable things that they can start employing. Ironically, none of those are slow down your drinking, right? They're all
Right.
lifestyle,
Right.
environmental, habitual kind of things.
Yeah. Kind of addressing the core. Going to the root instead of the what's on the surface.
Yeah. Oh, I'll give you one example for a second. Um, so again, free recommendation for everybody listening to this. There's a thing I talk about in the book as one of the practices. It talks about accountability. Most of us run away from accountability in our life because accountability looks like punishment normally. um, hey, did you drink? And then you have to kind of get caught up and like, oh no, I didn't. What are you talking about? Right? And you run away from it, or you try to hide it, you try to lie.
Hmm.
So I reinforce for people that accountability is a good thing. But one of the tools I give for that is I think everybody in life should create a personal advisory board for themselves. What does that mean? Have people in your life that you can be honest with who live a life in a way that you look up to, that you want to model. They're good at it. Every business has an advisory board. Why? Because your advisory board will help you make better decisions. You can come to them, you can confide in them, and they can help you. That men's group, John, that you've invited me to, that's a personal advisory board,
Hmm.
right? It's like sit down in a room with people,
Hmm.
talk about what's going on for you, and listen to feedback from them, incorporate it in, and then make choices in your life. People don't think that has anything to do with your mental health um or your addiction, but it has everything to do with it because then you're
Yeah.
not running constantly.
Dr. Adi Jaffe, I'm so grateful that you're on my personal advisory board. And also, you know, as we get older and we do life together, I really appreciate
Mm,
your friendship. Also,
same, man.
I'm just a fan of, you know, the way you show up in the world. So go pick up his book. It's out now and it's out wide, Unhooked.
Unhooked.
And you could follow him where? Social media, what's your,
Uh, I'm everywhere as Dr. Adi Jaffe. That's
yeah,
DR and then Adi Jaffe. And then adijaffe.com is also a website you can visit.
I'm glad you got that doctor in.
Yeah, got to get the doctor in somewhere.
Gotta get that doctor in. Thank you for listening. You will find his book in the show notes, and I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you as we continue to reflect and go on our journey on this planet.
Yeah, I appreciate
Yeah,
you, man. Thank you so much for having me
thank you,
on.
brother.
Thanks for
Be
everybody for
well.
listening.
All right. Wait. Hold on.